Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming from Los Angeles. And here are the stories we're watching tonight, starting with a stunning reversal by President Biden as the White House clears the way for expanding the border wall in Texas, something he explicitly said he would not do when campaigning for the job of president.
Trump campaigned on build that wall. Are you willing to tear that wall down?
No, there will not be another foot of wall constructed on my administration.
So why go back on a campaign promise to do something that was a cornerstone of Trump's border policy? Then chaos looming over the future of the House of Representatives. But will the next House Speaker try to change the rules to prevent another mutiny from happening on the floor?
Would you support changing the rules, especially the motion to vacate?
That is a conference decision, but I tell you what, if that's what the conference wants to do, then I would support it.
And the case of Adnan Syed, the subject of the podcast Serial, goes to the Maryland Supreme Court. A decision that could send him back to prison could be coming up. We'll explain. And we'll tell you about a scientific discovery that could shed light on the mystery of autism. And we are starting tonight with some very, very confusing developments on the immigration front and some recent moves from the Biden administration's migration policy that seem contradictory. Now, first, the administration flip-flopping when it comes to border wall construction over in Texas, waiving a bunch of federal laws and regulations there to clear the way to build more barriers along the southern border, which is being seen as a total about-face from Biden's big 2020 campaign promise that not another foot of wall would be built using taxpayer money, which you just heard. But then today, Biden went on camera and said that this was all related to appropriation of funds and nothing else. Take a listen.
The border wall, the money was appropriated for the border wall. I tried to get them to reappropriate, to redirect that money. They didn't. They wouldn't. And in the meantime, there's nothing under the law other than they have to use the money for what it was appropriated. I can't stop that.
Do you believe the border wall works?
No.
Now, DHS also coming out with a statement saying that a border wall is not the answer. Even still, it looks like the administration will be building new wall over in Texas, and that means sidestepping 26 federal laws and some environmental regulations to do so. The administration also announcing today that they're going to start or restart those deportation flights for Venezuelan migrants. And that decision just days after the administration decided to give temporary protected status to Venezuelan migrants who came to the country by July 31st. Meanwhile, the migrant surge over on the southern border is showing no signs of slowing down. Just yesterday alone, some 10,000 migrants crossed over, according to the CBP. And the ripple effects of the surge are being felt in cities like Chicago and New York, where migrant centers are becoming overwhelmed. Now, we know that is a lot to digest here, but the big top line from today is this issue of a border wall, and we're going to get into all of that. But a quick overview, because a lot of times we often forget how much of the border already has a wall and how much of the border does not have a wall. This is Mexico right here. That's the U.S., right? California, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico. That whole border is about 2,000 miles. You can see there's wall along some of it. Most of California there. There's Arizona, New Mexico, and then there's Texas, and a lot of Texas does not have a border wall. There are very large gaps there. Some areas do have barriers that are vehicle barriers, which don't stop people. Others do have those pedestrian barriers. But again, out of this 2,000 miles of border, not even half of it has a wall or a barrier. So how do all the new Biden policies fit into all this? Let's bring in NBC Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander to help break it down for us. Peter, lots of what looks very much like flip-flopping there today, a lot of backpedaling. So are they building the wall or not?
Well, so let's break this down. President Biden today argued that his administration is not building more wall in southern Texas because of the surge in migrants, more than 3 million in the last year alone, a record. But because he says they were required by law to spend money that Congress appropriated back in 2019 during the Trump administration. The president, you'll remember, he campaigned, Gadi, vowing that he was not going to build a single foot of wall during his administration. So this is a reversal, but the White House makes very clear that this is not a policy change. For his part, the president today said that border walls do not work, but ultimately, President Biden right now is effectively stuck following through with one of the signature policies of his predecessor, former President Trump, who today insisted, Gadi, that he deserved an apology.
Now, Peter, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, but it says here that, like, they are following the law, and they have to do this because they're following the law, but they are also waiving a bunch of laws to do this. It seems totally counterintuitive here.
Well, this was part of the argument, and we discussed this a bit in today's White House briefing, where I was effectively trying to push the White House and saying there are a lot of ways to slow roll this, so to speak, to try to fight back. But they say they had to use this money by the end of the current fiscal year or it would be gone. The fiscal year ended at the end of September, so that's what the date sort of has to do with all of this. The DHS Secretary, Gadi, he did notably in this official notice overnight say that there is an acute, these were his words, an acute and immediate need to construct physical barriers to stop illegal crossings into the U.S., which the president, he appeared to contradict today. Late today, traveling in Mexico City, we did hear from the DHS Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, who said the administration's positions on the effectiveness of a border wall has not changed.
There is no new administration policy with respect to the border wall. From day one, this administration has made clear that a border wall is not the answer. That remains our position, and our position has never wavered. The language in the Federal Register notice is being taken out of context.
That is the Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. They are trying to make this very clear. So while the policy may not change going forward, it doesn't stop this administration from going forward, as it indicates, with a Trump-era policy to complete money, wall construction that was approved just a matter of 4 years ago. Gadi.
So they're saying that this is taken out of context, but what they're saying is being taken out of context is the actual construction of border barriers. Is that right?
Well, there's a lot of nuance in all of this. Effectively, they say that we are following the law. That's what's going on here. We had this money. It was appropriated. We try to appropriate it elsewhere. That couldn't happen, so we're doing it before the money expires. You know, Gadi, this does raise an issue that we're seeing increasingly, though, not just around the country, but particularly in some blue states. The Democratic Illinois governor, J.B. Pritzker, he slammed President Biden for not doing enough. He wrote, among other things, that the federal government's lack of intervention and coordination at the border has created what he called an untenable situation for Illinois. Pritzker is an ally of this White House. The White House is blaming Congress for not acting. They say that they've accelerated work permits, provided $1 billion to cities nationwide, but we are seeing protests in Chicago and in plenty of other cities right now growing. We should note that Texas's Republican governor says that he will continue busing migrants to sanctuary cities to relieve border towns. And tonight, a DHS assessment team is in Chicago. Gadi.
Just keeping an eye on all the people that are mad right now at the administration for this. It looks like you've got environmental concerns and environmental activists that are going after President Biden for what they're calling a flip-flop. You've got immigration activists. You've got Democratic governors from Democratic states. It seems like this is a political mess for the White House, a policy mess for the White House. Any chance of this being clarified by what we're seeing late today?
I don't know if there's going to be any new clarification. I think the best clarification right now is what Mayorkas said, which is that the policy isn't changing or has not changed. That's not going to satisfy a lot of people here. But we do have an interesting takeaway in all of this, because this does come against the backdrop of another election just a little more than a year away in November of 2024. And the latest NBC News polling shows that Republicans now have the advantage over Democrats by about 18 points when Americans are asked who they believe would better handle immigration. That is the biggest deficit ever for Democrats on this issue, an issue where Democrats had for most of the last 3 administrations led. Gadi.
Peter Alexander, and I can't thank you enough for being inside that White House press room, pressing for answers as hard as you were on a confusing day like today. Thanks so much, brother.
Appreciate it.
So you just heard Peter mention that there are cities like Chicago and New York that are overwhelmed with the number of migrants coming in. Mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, saying that as many as 22 buses full of migrants arrived in his city yesterday, and the situation is similar over in New York as well. NBC's Julia Ainsley has the latest from Chicago.
Tonight, officials warning Chicago is approaching a breaking point. Tents full of desperate migrants lining Chicago's iconic Lakeshore Drive. Migrant shelters inside O'Hare Airport. A total of 17,000 migrants showing up since last August, and officials expect 1,200 per day to keep coming.
Now Chicago is building sprawling tent camps to get migrants off the streets of places like this ahead of the cold winter months.
Democratic Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker slamming President Biden for not doing enough, writing, "The federal government's lack of intervention and coordination at the border has created an untenable situation for Illinois." The White House blaming Congress for not acting and saying they've accelerated work permits and provided $1 billion to cities nationwide.
I don't want them there.
But protests here are growing.
To have the government come in and dump 300 people right next door to me, it is not fair.
The Latino Pilsen neighborhood was the first to build a shelter for migrants, and they're now preparing a new shelter to take up to 1,000 more. Community leaders tell us they want to help migrants, but they're worried about resources for poor Chicagoans, too.
I'm concerned because of the slow response by the federal and state government.
When winter comes, not only will you not have enough room for migrants, you also might not have enough room to take in some homeless people who live on the streets here in Pilsen, American citizens.
Absolutely.
We met these migrants sleeping outside a police station. Stephanie tells us she boarded a free bus in Texas because she thought Chicago had a refugee camp. Some of us have been here weeks, she said. She told us she's desperate for a job to support her 1-year-old son back in Venezuela.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he will continue busing migrants to sanctuary cities to relieve border towns. Tonight, a DHS assessment team is here in the city.
Julie Ainsley, thanks so much. Now, the fight to be the next Speaker of the House was already set to be chaotic, and then Trump stepped in, sort of. He hasn't declared his candidacy or anything, but sources are telling NBC that he is planning on showing up to the Capitol next week. This would be the first time since January 6th. Now, keep in mind, those same sources say they don't think he is interested in the speaker job. But as the GOP is set to hold an internal election early next week, his arrival could complicate things for the two congressmen who have said they do want that job. Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. For more, we're joined by NBC's Ali Vitale. Ali?
Gadi, another day with no consensus, but certainly candidates openly campaigning for the job of Speaker. I spoke this morning with Congressman Jim Jordan, who's one of the two officially announced candidates in this race for Speaker. He said that he would not push his conference on the idea of a motion to vacate. That basically means that any Speaker who comes next, including Jordan, would still be subjected to that one-vote margin of a motion to vacate, which we saw Matt Gaetz use to effectively oust Speaker McCarthy, the first time that that's been successful in the history of Congress. Nevertheless, when I asked if he thought that Gaetz should be expelled from the Republican conference, as some other Republicans have said they want to do, Jordan told me that he thought that Gaetz was a good member of Congress and that he didn't support expelling him from the conference, in part because he thought that Gaetz brought a lot to committees like the Judiciary Committee that Jordan currently serves as the chairman of, but also because he felt that with majorities so thin as Republicans have, he couldn't afford to officially lose a member. All of that so fascinating as we think about the larger dynamics of this speaker race. Steve Scalise, of course, the other man officially running. He's currently in House leadership, the #2 Republican. But both of these members, Jordan and Scalise, may have numbers problems. Getting to that magic number of 217 is going to be difficult for anybody. I know from talking to Republican members just in the last few days and the last few hours, they don't know that any candidate is a consensus choice at this point. That's going to make it really difficult coming into early next week when they expect to try to get consensus around a choice, but it's not clear that anyone has that. Gadi?
Ali Vitale, thanks so much. In breaking news tonight in the world of football, Hall of Fame linebacker Dick Butkus has died. Butkus played 9 seasons with the Chicago Bears. He was a graduate of the University of Illinois, where he led the team to a Rose Bowl victory in 1964. He went on to become the first-round draft pick for the Bears in 1965. Butkus was inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility back in 1979 and is considered one of the best linebackers to ever play in the game. His family says he passed away in his sleep in a Malibu home overnight. He was 80 years old. And we've still got a lot ahead. The DOJ is playing up this lavish lifestyle of FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried. We're going to tell you why a $30 million penthouse in the Bahamas and Tom Brady came up in court today. Plus, later this hour, autism has been a very, very big mystery, but it seems like we may finally be getting some answers. That's just ahead, so stay tuned. Hey there, welcome back. And here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Mass shooter fake Frank James, the man who set off smoke bombs on a crowded New York subway before shooting 10 people last year, was sentenced today to 10 life term plus 10 years on terrorism and weapons charges. Luckily, no one was killed during the attack. And police in New York arrested a suspect in a deadly stabbing in Brooklyn that was caught on video. 32-year-old Ryan Carson, known for his community activism, was killed early Monday morning on his way home from a wedding with his girlfriend. A surveillance video shows the suspect confronting Carson unprovoked before stabbing him repeatedly in the chest. And if you thought last month was a little too hot for comfort, you are not wrong. New data is revealing that this was the hottest September on record. It was also the hottest summer on record. And President Biden's dog, Commander, is out of the White House, at least for now, after biting a bunch of people, like 11 people. Just last week, the German Shepherd bit a Secret Service officer. The other German Shepherd, Major, who was living with Biden, was also sent to live with friends in 2021. And live from New York, Saturday Night Live is making its return to Studio 8H. The writer's strike, which is now over, forced SNL to wrap up early back in May. Former cast member Pete Davidson is hosting the premiere on October 14th, with Bad Bunny hosting the following weekend. And Trump's former lawyer, Sidney Powell, was in court today trying to get the judge to throw out the charges against her. Her lawyer argued that Powell had no part in the election interference, but the judge, however, shot that request down, and NBC's Blaine Alexander has more.
Well, Gadi, today's hearing was about 90 minutes long. We heard from attorneys for Sidney Powell, essentially trying to argue to get the entire thing thrown out, to get the charges dismissed. They were arguing that there is prosecutorial misconduct, essentially saying that DA Fani Willis and her team had evidence that showed that she had no knowledge and had no involvement with what happened down in Coffee County when it comes to the voting machines and the data being breached down there. Now, of course, as you can imagine, the state pushed back very strongly against this, saying that there's no basis for that allegation, and basically saying that they were trying to argue their set of facts and argue this via motions, saying that if they wanted to do this, they could actually just do it in court before a jury. Here's a little bit of what we heard in the courtroom, first from the attorney for Sidney Powell and then the attorney for the state. Take a look.
As I've always said, is Ms. Powell had nothing to do with Coffee County. She didn't have anything to do with it. I've been contending that. I've been contending that there's evidence that shows that. So that testimony, emails, documents, other information that demonstrates that people were asked, what do you know about Ms. Powell connected to Coffee County? And they say nothing. Never talked to her, never spoke with her, never met with her. All of that information, Your Honor, I've been saying is Brady.
And the fact is, the defendant's pleadings and his arguments are based on falsehoods. And the state takes these allegations against us very, very seriously. The allegation that we're withholding evidence, suppressing evidence, and that we're committing prosecutorial misconduct are outrageous. They're not true.
Now, after the hearing, the judge certainly indicated that he's not inclined to dismiss those charges. Remember, Sidney Powell and Ken Chesborough are set to begin trial on October 23rd. These will be the very first of Trump's co-defendants to go on trial for this. Now, we do know that the DA's team is going to offer plea deals for them as well. No details as to what exactly that could look like or whether that will be taken. But again, full speed ahead for trial to begin on October 23rd. Gadi.
Blaine Alexander, thanks so much. And coming up, the Kaiser healthcare strike is only lasting for a few days, but it's forcing cancer patients to cancel their chemo treatments. That's actually happening. But first, you got to see this. Don't panic. Looks like a house on fire, but it is actually just Halloween decorations that are lit. This fire department in upstate New York, they were pretty surprised when they showed up to put out those flames, but firefighters weren't even mad. They were just straight impressed, calling the display amazing. We've got some burning questions, though. Like, how do you even live in there with the lights and the smoke and the fog? Regardless, those decorations are fire. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. And here are the stories that are happening out west that we're following right now. Funeral services were held today for an LA County Sheriff's deputy who was shot while waiting at a stoplight in his patrol car. That shooting happened last month. Ryan Klickenboomer was 30 years old and a third-generation deputy. A suspect was charged with the murder and has pled not guilty by reason of insanity. And that gynecologist accused of sexually abusing students on USC's campus has been found dead. Dr. George Tyndall was scheduled to stand trial next year for abusing women during gynecological exams at campus health clinics for decades, and he pled not guilty in 2019. And 2 years later, USC paid over $1 billion to settle abuse claims. LAPD is calling it a natural death. Tyndall was 76 years old. And this next story is pure fuel for nightmares. Some 10,000 bed bugs were found in what local reports are calling 2 undisclosed locations in Arizona. Now, the pest company called in to deal with that situation, said they were spread out under a king-size mattress and piled an inch deep on the floor there. Those pests can be hard to spot sometimes, except, of course, in this case. And the largest ever healthcare walkout in U.S. history has entered its second day of a planned 3-day strike, putting Kaiser Permanente under pressure to reach an agreement on a new contract. After day one of the walkout and some back and forth, Kaiser returned with an offer, but the union says it is nowhere near enough. Meanwhile, we are hearing more and more stories about the patients that are being affected by this strike. Some people had elective surgeries canceled or rescheduled. NBC's David Noriega joins us now from the picket lines here in L.A. David, you've been talking with patients about how this is affecting them, right? And some of those patients actually going down to the picket lines where you were.
Yeah, several of them. I and our colleagues at NBC News have spoken to several patients, including some who've had really important, meaningful procedures postponed by this. The interesting thing is that pretty much every single one of them talks about having had these procedures delayed or postponed even before the strike, which just speaks to the fact that this strike is not an isolated thing. It is about an underlying problem, which is the staffing crisis facing Kaiser and the healthcare sector at large. Like you said, a lot of the patients are actually going to the picket lines to openly show their support for the workers. I spoke to one of them earlier today, and here's what she had to say.
When I had a car accident and I went to my doctor's clinic, there were not even Band-Aids in his clinic. The workers have to run someplace to find them. Now we're finding out that not even the workers get paid what they're supposed to get. So where is the money?
Where is the money?
Where's the money? Bringing her own Band-Aids to the protest. It's wild.
Yeah, this strike is not... It's not even about the workers and their demands. It's about a deeper underlying problem. It's a symptom of a deeper problem.
Yeah, I mean, here in L.A., like trying to book an appointment, a doctor's appointment, it's months in advance, and then sometimes they cancel, and then it's another few months that you have to wait. I do want to ask, so much of this does have to do with wages in terms of filling those jobs and keeping people in those jobs. Kaiser came back with the wage proposal, right, today? What did that look like?
Significant movement in the negotiations. Kaiser came back with a proposal that offers a 5% increase for the first year. That's up from the 3.5 they were initially offering. Still 2 points below the 7% the coalition of unions is asking for. The unions are not budging on that. They say it's not enough.
And so where do the negotiations stand right now?
Yeah, I've spoken to several negotiators with the union. They say that aside from the substantive issues, the staffing and the pay, their main problem is that Kaiser is not negotiating in good faith. They're not taking this process nearly seriously enough. The bargaining has been happening since April. They say there have been times that they've been essentially negotiating with an empty room. Here's what one of the negotiators told me on the picket lines.
We've gone to bargaining sessions where Kaiser didn't meet with us. So we're away from our families, we're away from our jobs to bargain, and we're sitting there and they're not coming to the table.
They just don't show up?
No, they don't show up.
How many times has that happened?
It's happened about maybe a good three times.
We put these specific claims to Kaiser, and they haven't responded. We did do an interview with them earlier where they disputed the general assertion that they're not bargaining in good faith. They say they are committed to reaching an agreement. Nevertheless, what the union negotiators say is that no real progress will be made until they're sitting in a room face-to-face with the CEO of Kaiser and the other executives who are empowered to make these decisions. That proposal we talked about earlier, it came to them in an email. They say that is a sign of one of the really fundamental problems that's keeping these negotiations from moving forward.
David Noriega, I appreciate your coverage on all this. Thanks so much for joining us.
A pleasure, Gadi. Thank you.
Remember that guy accused of murder from the original hit podcast Serial and the whole saga about how he may or may not have been wrongly accused? Well, it's still unfolding, and this is him today at the Maryland Supreme Court, where his case is once again in front of a judge. But let's back up a bit. Adnan Syed previously spent 23 years behind bars for the murder of his high school girlfriend, Hae-Min Lee, whose body was found in Baltimore in a park in 1999. The podcast Serial brought this case to the masses, and it shed light on the lack of evidence tying him to that crime. Well, last year, after a series of legal twists and turns, his conviction was overturned, but then it was reinstated, not because of any new evidence, but because the victim's family argued that they weren't told in a timely fashion, and that violated their rights. And that brings us back to today. Once again, he is fighting to stay out of prison, and here's what he had to say outside the courthouse earlier today.
We're grateful for the opportunity to be able to present our case to the Supreme Court. And we're grateful for all the support that we've received over the past 24 years.
And joining us now is NBC News Now legal analyst Angela Sinandela. Angie, this case has so many twists and turns. Can you explain how we got here?
Yes, you're right. It's just been topsy-turvy. So it started in 2000 when Adnan Syed was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Hae-Min Lee. And then it really wasn't until 2014 when, as you mentioned, the Serial podcast legitimately uncovered new evidence. And so from that point on, Syed's team really tried to get new trials, new hearings, but that didn't really work out until 2022, when prosecutors themselves dismissed their charges, requested for the request for the conviction to be entirely reversed because they found new DNA evidence and they decided that their own prosecutorial team had committed misconduct. So these prosecutors then reversed everything. The judge agreed and he walked out of prison. But then fast forward to 2023, when again, he is back in court and the appellate court then reinstated his conviction. It is so confusing because this man is stuck in a procedural nightmare. At this point in time, the conviction still stands, yet the prosecutor has dismissed all charges. Now, if you can imagine, that's a no man's land that doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's where he is.
And so much of this comes down to not letting the victim's family know what was happening, right? They have DNA evidence that they say did not tie him to the murders. They dropped the case. Ideally, they would have called up the family, let them know, given them the notice that this was going to happen, and then moved forward, but they didn't. And that's where we're in the no man's land, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just to fully clarify, the victim's family does not even want him in prison. So the victim's family does not want him behind bars. Nobody in this situation, from the prosecutor to the original judge to the defendant to the victim's family, wants him behind bars, which is why I would be shocked if that's what the Supreme Court does, puts him back in prison. I mean, if you look at it, this all comes down to the prosecutors making mistakes, admitting their own mistakes. And then in this case, with not notifying the victim properly, that's another prosecutorial mistake. They only notified him on a Friday for a Monday hearing that did not give the brother enough time to fly out to Baltimore. So does it make sense then, Gadi, for after prosecutors to make mistakes, for the defendant to suffer to go to prison? I mean, none of this makes sense at this point. So you imagine the Supreme Court will not put him back in prison.
Yeah, so much focus on this, and yet, as it stands right now, the killer is still out there, right?
I mean, it sounds like that is very possible. We don't know who that person is, but we don't think it is Adnan Syed at this point. Nobody thinks it is, again, including the victim's family. So we hope we find the right person.
NBC's Angela Sinandela, thank you so very much. Turning now to California Senator Dianne Feinstein, who was laid to rest today. Her memorial service was held at San Francisco City Hall, where she had been laying in state. Now, thousands passed through yesterday to pay their respects, so many that visitation hours were extended. Now, today's service was supposed to be public, but due to security measures, a live stream was set up instead, and several lawmakers were there, including Vice President Kamala Harris, who spoke during the service.
Dianne had the courage to take on the many tough fights, even when she was faced with fierce opposition and political peril, and especially when her work was in defense of the Constitution and the security of the American people.
And NBC's Liz Kreutz joins us now from San Francisco. Hey there, Liz. How's her family doing tonight?
Hey, Gadi. Well, we were actually able to hear from Feinstein's granddaughter. It was one of the most special parts of this ceremony. Her granddaughter, Eileen, who actually really resembles Feinstein, spoke about Dianne Feinstein, the grandma, gave a different perspective to her and her life. And it's very clear that the family wants Senator Feinstein to be remembered for her legacy, not just for her policies that she put into place, but really her legacy when it comes to paving the way for future generations of women in politics. Take a listen to what her granddaughter had to say.
She showed young women everywhere that they too can be leaders, that they can make an impact, and that they deserve a seat at the table. But to me, she will be remembered as the most incredible grandmother.
And she talked about how she loved to play chess with her grandma and hide and seek, and just this incredible bond that they shared. So it was really special to see this other side of Dianne Feinstein, Gadi.
Yeah, and so often we see laying in state at the U.S. Capitol. What was the significance of her laying in state in San Francisco instead of D.C.?
Yeah, Gadi, I think it just speaks to her incredible ties to the city. She was born here, but also beyond that, she has represented the people of San Francisco in some capacity for more than 50 years. She is truly part of the fabric of San Francisco. In fact, even here during the ceremony, it is Fleet Week right now here. And so during the ceremony outside here at City Hall, Blue Angels kept flying over, and it was very loud and a little distracting, but it was also a very fitting distraction because Dianne Feinstein actually brought Fleet Week to San Francisco in 1981. It has now become one of the city's most beloved annual traditions. And at one point when the planes were flying over, it was so loud that Nancy Pelosi had to stop her remarks. And she said, you know what, flyovers all weekend. This is exactly how Feinstein would have wanted it. So just so much so, Feinstein is San Francisco to so many people here, and she leaves behind a huge legacy for the city.
Flyovers all weekend. Liz Kreutz, thanks so much. And scientists at Stanford University have just discovered dozens of genes that may cause autism. So why is that a big deal? Because it may one day speed up the process of developing new treatments. These findings were a decade in the making. They were published in Nature magazine last week. And autism tends to be described as a spectrum, and about 1 in every 36 kids here in the United States are diagnosed with it. With this research, not only could treatment look really different, but it begins to show a better understanding of the building blocks of our brain development. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Vin Gupta joins us now. Dr. Gupta, thank you so much for being with us. Autism is something that, you know, even with the statistics that we just listed, it's considered widely underdiagnosed, right? Could this maybe help people get the diagnoses they need?
Gadi, that's exactly right. Thank you for highlighting this important study. This study really did elucidate the critical importance of a select group of genes that we've long known are linked to neurodevelopment conditions like autism. And what it showed was the importance of these genes in regulating the function of a group of nerves called interneurons that oversee human functions like learning, memory, planning, cognition. Those functions that we know can be in imbalance in, say, a child with autism. So this is critical in helping us better understand the disease. And as you did in the setup, potentially future therapies.
When it comes to, there's identifying the genes, and then there's identifying the reasons and the environments that all of this exists in, right? Could this help? Could this research help in understanding how autism comes to be?
Absolutely. And I think one of the purposes of the study was to exactly your point. It's one thing to look at the gene in isolation, say in a lab. It's another thing to see how that's actually interacting with the other genes in your body. And that's what this study really did. And that's why it's so potentially transformative. It showed the ways in which genes interact with each other to create potential imbalances in how our neurons function. Critical, Gadi, because that's how we're going to potentially develop new therapies, looking at how genes function in the body, how abnormalities may come to exist, and how we can design in 3D, say, a gene therapy that can actually solve this problem.
Design in 3D gene therapies. I mean, when you look 10 to 15 years out, and which is hard to do these days with everything changing so fast, how do you see what we have now discovered possibly being used to treat autism?
Well, Gadi, we say often now, just given all the change around us, you just highlighted this, that we're in a golden age of medicine. I think fundamentally, this study is leading and tipping our hat that we're going to actually have therapies to cure autism spectrum disorder. Right now, we only have medical therapies to treat, say, symptoms like irritability. Now we're talking about maybe a new wave of therapies to actually cure the underlying condition. Big transformative moment here. This is the first step.
Dr. Vin Gupta, thank you so much for joining us. And coming up, some of the big headlines trending around the world. Plus, later this hour, how far would you go to try to extend your life? We're going to show you the biohacking trend that has some people going to some extreme measures. That's just ahead. Hey, welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world in 80 seconds. In India, at least 18 people are dead and up to 100 more are missing after a flash flood in the Himalayas. Heavy rains caused a glacial mountain lake to burst over its banks, washing away homes and bridges downstream. Officials say thousands of tourists stranded in the flooded region are expected to be evacuated by air. And Iran's morality police are being accused of brutalizing another teenage girl for violating the country's Islamic dress code. The case of 16-year-old Armida Gayorvan has sparked outrage 1 year after Mahsa Amini's death led to mass protests there. A Kurdish rights group says the teenager suffered severe physical assault because of what she was wearing. And Scottish authorities have extradited an American fugitive accused of faking his own death to avoid a rape charge in Utah. Nicholas Rossi was arrested in Glasgow back in 2021 while claiming to be an Irish orphan. Fingerprints found in a U.S. database proved otherwise, and a judge ruled in August that Rossi could be extradited. And an American F-16 shot down an armed drone from Turkey today. The Pentagon says it was getting too close to U.S. troops in Syria. Turkey says the drone did not belong to its armed forces. The Pentagon says this is the first time the U.S. has shot down an aircraft from a NATO ally. And the death toll following a catastrophic airstrike on a cafe in eastern Ukraine now sits at over 50, and among them a 6-year-old child. Officials in Kyiv are calling it one of the war's deadliest attacks, and President Volodymyr Zelensky called it a deliberate act of terrorism. Raf Sanchez has the latest.
Hey there, the death toll continues to rise, but this is already the deadliest Russian strike on Ukrainian civilians this year, and one of the deadliest strikes of the entire war. Here's what we know. According to Ukrainian officials, this Russian missile fell on a village called Hroza. It's about 30 miles from the front line. There is no sign that there were any legitimate military targets in the area, and the scale of the loss of life is staggering. This is a village of 300 people, 51 of whom were killed in this Russian strike. The grim irony here, these people were concentrated at a single cafe because they were attending a memorial for a neighbor who had been killed earlier by the Russians. Among the dead is a 6-year-old boy born in 2017. Now, the Kharkiv region in northeastern Ukraine has seen some of the worst horrors of the entire war. I have spent a lot of time there, but people are absolutely shocked by what has happened today. The regional governor has declared 3 days of mourning across Kharkiv. This all comes as President Zelensky continues to try to shore up support in the West for his country, especially amidst this concern about what's going on in Washington. That 45-day continuing resolution that was passed by Kevin McCarthy just before he was booted out as Speaker of the House keeps the U.S. government open, but it does not include additional funding for Ukraine, and that is something that officials in Kyiv are extremely concerned about. President Biden has said he is worried about it also. He will do his best to try to keep American support flowing to the Ukrainians, but it will get to a point where Congress is going to need to vote to keep this money going. President Zelensky was in Spain earlier today. He tried to put a brave face on what's happening in Washington. He says this is a difficult election period. He says there are some strange voices right now, but he did say he is confident that having visited the American capital last month in September, that there is a fundamental bedrock of support for Ukraine in both the Democratic and the Republican parties, and he's hoping he can count on those parties to keep support flowing. Back to you.
Raf Sanchez, thanks so much. And before we go, it is time for the future of everything. And when you hear the word hacking, you probably think about a computer or some sort of tech. But some people are hacking their bodies, to try to extend their lives. We're going to show you the links they're going to. Some we even tried for ourselves. And I'm not going to lie, it got a little nippy in there. We'll show you what that looks like coming up next. Time now for the future of everything. Tonight, we're going to talk about biohacking, what it is, what it can do to your body. But first, to San Francisco, where the battle between Elon Musk and the SEC is brewing. The agency is suing Musk to try to force him to testify in their investigation into his purchase of Twitter back in 2022. The SEC says the billionaire failed to appear to testify last month, despite a subpoena to do so. But a lawyer for Musk says the SEC has already taken his testimony several times. And Meta and Amazon laid off additional workers this week. Meta laid off workers in its Reality Labs division, while Amazon's video game streaming website Twitch laid off an unspecified number of employees. These were just the latest layoffs in a wave of job cuts that have been going on for nearly a year. And AT&T has teamed up with Gallaudet University in an effort to level the playing field. Today, the company and the School for Deaf and Hard of Hearing students unveiled the first ever 5G connected football helmet featuring a small display screen on the inside. Now, Gallaudet's coach says he thinks the helmet will change the game.
It's simple. Make the play call. From there, touch it, goes right to the quarterback. Quarterback receives it. He sees it live. He communicates with the team.
Just realizing, like, is this for real? Like, can you look around and be able to see the plays inside of the helmet? I mean, that's just awesome.
Future of football right there. The university was cleared by the NCAA to use the helmet in its home game this Saturday against Hilbert College. And now to that biohacking stuff. How far would you go to turn back the clock? Some of us just try to, eat right, exercise, just hope for the best. But others take things to a whole new level. And now there are social clubs dedicated to biohacking together. So if you feel like trying it out with me, then come along to this one spot I know of here in LA. And a warning, dress warm because you're going to need it after.
It's a health craze taking over the internet. With over 700 million views on TikTok, hashtag biohacking, or hacking your body, which some will think will create a better version of yourself. Everything from wearable tech to diet shifts, gene analysis. It's the do-it-yourself approach to health, but the DIY lifestyle can be a little lonely, so why not do it together? And that's what brings me to Remedy Place, looking for the fountain of youth on Sunset Boulevard.
So we're a whole entire club centered around self-care, but with a social twist.
Here you can breathe your way into the 6-minute ice bath club.
Good, control the breath, relax the shoulders.
And once wide awake,
healing has never felt
You did
so cool.
How about a little relaxing in the hyperbaric chambers?
Okay.
Meant to help increase your oxygen intake to speed up your body's healing process.
I feel pretty good.
What's not so relaxing? The price tag of $2,500 a month, which gets an all-access membership. Cryotherapy, cupping, acupuncture, lymphatic massages, automatic foam rollers, vitamin IV drips, and more. The effectiveness of many of these treatments often unclear. For example, those vitamin IV drips, a large review of medical literature shows no clear results for those with major issues, let alone for healthy people, where it's often compared to simple hydration. But Dr. Leary, a chiropractor and founder of the Remedy Place, says the idea is about finding healthier ways to socialize.
Meeting spot, after work hangout instead of a happy hour.
Here's how he reframes the booming trend.
We don't biohack, we remedy. Because there is no shortcuts with your health.
The global biohacking industry valued at nearly $17 billion last year and is projected to reach more than $80 billion by 2031. And for extreme biohackers, it is not cheap. Take 46-year-old biohacking millionaire Brian Johnson, who I met up with earlier this year. He says he spends about $2 million a year trying to be 18 again, basically aging backwards.
We're trying to basically measure every single organ of the entire body, and then we're trying to rejuvenate the age.
Which means some extremes. He takes over 100 pills a day, wears a tiny contraption on, well, his other Johnson to monitor nighttime erections. He even injected his son's plasma in him, something which he stopped doing after he said had no benefits. Johnson says everyone doesn't have to follow his exact move, but they can use it as a guide, which a lot of people do. Teresa Skrabonic's goal was simple: live longer and look younger.
I came from a family that never took care of themselves, smoked 2-3 packs of cigarettes a day, and they all died early. And so I thought, I'm going to do the exact opposite.
She started taking handfuls of supplements and prescriptions, but they didn't have the impact she wanted.
I felt worse than I did before I took it. I started getting headaches. I was taking naps twice a day.
The obsession impacting her mentally.
I wasn't really living. I was living to take the pills so later I could live.
Now she cautions people, emphasizing working with your doctor and knowing what your body needs.
I started using my body and my diet and started just doing the things I was deficient in, and I just feel a lot better.
Back at Remedy Place, they're not hesitating to jump in and try to rethink health.
There you go. There is no quick fix. That's because you're repairing. You're not anti-aging.
Aging is inevitable, but doing it as best you can, that's priceless.
And while we were in that ice bath, the doc told me that people actually come to that place for first dates, get in that ice bath. I was like, no way, this is the worst first date ever. But then you get out and you're cold and you just want a hug and you want to be warm. So who knows? Maybe it's genius. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you here tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.